Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you to all the sponsors of this event, and Reverend Steve Morgan, who was my first contact in this area and persuaded me to visit here. I'm delighted to be here and have been enjoying your beautiful campus this afternoon, and looking forward to this event here to build some bridges, to bring about some understanding, and go forward. Peter has introduced me very graciously, and I hope I can live up to the expectation that he has generated. But anyhow, I am very excited to be here. I am going to start my narrative by sharing with you some part of my own life journey, because I think that this is perhaps the best way to illustrate the struggles of Muslim women in general. I was born in Lahore, Pakistan. Pakistan, as some of you might know, is the only country in the world that was created in the name of Islam. And Lahore is a very historic town, city, which still preserves its heritage from centuries ago. And my ancestors, who had started from somewhere in Arabia, because my father's family are Sayyids, that they are descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. And they started from Arabia, and then they lived for quite a while in a place called Herat in Afghanistan. And then they came to Lahore, and in Lahore they set up a colony which was called Muslim Town. And I have a home in Lahore, and that is in that area still. I want to tell you a little bit about my parents. My father came from a family of bureaucrats, government officers. My grandfather was a police officer. Those were kind of rare positions at that time when the British were ruling over the subcontinent. And my grandfather was an eminent police officer, and he lived on a road that was named after him. It's called Fez Road. And my home in Lahore is on Fez Road. And one reason I have never moved from there is because of my family history. My father's family were all educated people. My mother's family, my mother came from a very different kind of background. Again, a very old family in Lahore. She came from an area called Bazar-e-Hakima, the area which was named after Hakims or physicians, doctors, but they were great patrons of art. And my mother's father was a playwright, a poet, and he was a scholar, and then her grandfather owned a theater. So they came from very different kinds of backgrounds. When they got married, my mother was 16 and my father was 32. And they came from very different backgrounds, as I've tried to indicate. Not only did they come from different backgrounds, they never agreed on anything. And but in those days, if you were married, you stayed married, and they had 9 children, so the marriage continued. But the differences in my parents' perspectives were could be most well illustrated by their difference in attitude towards daughters. There were 4 daughters. I was the 3rd daughter. I was the middle child in a family of 9. I had 5 brothers, and there were 4 sisters. And my father, who was a very kind person, a very saintly person, very highly respected in the community in which he lived, but he was conservative, and he believed that girls should be married at 16 to whoever was chosen for that's what happened to my two older sisters. My mother had a totally different point of view, and she had a passion for education, and she was a very independent person. In that day and age, I mean, she was an ultra-radical feminist before the term feminist was invented. So there was a lot of tussle on this matter in my family, and generally in my home there was a lot of conflict. I feel like I grew up under the shadow of clanging swords. But I had one sanctuary at that time, and that was my room. I don't know how in a house full of so many children I always had a room, but I did. And I spent as much time as I could in my room. I was a very dreamy, reclusive child. I read a lot, loved reading. I used to write poetry, and lived sort of, created my own world in my room. And then my other outlet was my school. I studied in an English missionary, Anglican missionary school. I went to the cathedral. It was called Cathedral High School, and there was a cathedral next to it. We went there all the time. And we began every morning by reciting the Lord's Prayer. So, you know, I had a much better grounding of Christianity during my childhood years than I had of Islam. Now, I mentioned that my father thought that if girls were married at 16, that they would settle well into their married life, and that was better for them, better for the family. And this is what happened to my two older sisters. When my second sister got married, she was 16 and I was 12. I was the next in line. And when that happened, it kind of suddenly hit me, it dawned on me, that 4 years from now, it was going to be my turn. And I told myself that I was not going to let it happen. I had to do something to protect myself from this conventionalism, traditionalism, or I didn't know these words then, but I knew that I didn't want to be sacrificed at the altar of convention. And so I tried to figure out how can I protect myself, what should I do? And I decided that I was going to say no to my father regardless of what he said to me. You know, I was 12 years old, and that's how I would think. But my rebellion started at that time. Before that, I was very retiring, very reclusive, but then I thought I have to now fend for myself. The first point of conflict came when my father, I studied in that Anglican missionary school, which was a co-educational school, and my three younger brothers went with me, so we were 4 children there. And I was very happy in my school. I was good at studies, and I played games, and I loved that school. But then my father wanted to take me out of that co-educational school and put me in a girls' school, a Catholic convent school. And I said, no, I'm not going to leave the school, and if you take me out of the school, I will not go to school. Now, it's very interesting, you know, I don't have time to really explain that culture to you and how it works, but all these conversations that were taking place about me were not between my father and me, but between my father and my mother that they were discussing. And I could hear it, but it was never a direct conversation with me. So I refused to change my school. You know, my father could have called my bluff, I was just a kid, but he didn't. So I continued to go to that school. But my father was very displeased with me. And his displeasure showed itself in the fact that he stopped talking to me. And between the age of 12 and 17, my father didn't speak a single word to me. That might seem strange to you, you know, was an experience for which I really don't have any words. But anyway, so I studied. I passed my high school, and at that time, my eldest sister, who had been married at 16, but her husband was studying in England, and she got a scholarship to go to study at the University of Durham, the third oldest university in England. And I pleaded with her that she should get me out of here, so she got me admission at that university. And so at the age of 17, I left Pakistan. And on the day that I left Pakistan, my father talked to me and said goodbye to me in 5 years. Anyway, I went to England and studied there, and I was extremely homesick for a long time. You know, I came from a large family and it was a totally different place, different culture. But I was very interested in my studies. And after my undergraduate degree, I started my PhD studies, and I chose as a subject, the system in England is different, and so if you're studying for PhD, you have to write a thesis on whoever is the person you choose, and that's what you do, you write a long thesis. And so the person on whom I wrote my thesis was a poet-philosopher by the name of Muhammad Iqbal. And he had been born in India, but had become sort of the voice of the Muslims in India who were striving to be free of British colonialism. The centerpiece of Iqbal's philosophy, and Iqbal considered himself a disciple of Rumi. I don't know how many of you study Rumi, but the centerpiece of his philosophy was what is called the philosophy of Buddha, the philosophy of selfhood. And his philosophy is also very deeply rooted in Quranic teaching, and the Quranic verse that says God created human beings in the highest of modes, best of modes, God's most favored creation. But in order to live up to the expectation that went into creating human beings had to make themselves strong. So there are, in the Quran you see that there are certain attributes that are very highly praised, and then there are certain attributes that are not liked. There's certain things God does not like God does not like aggressors, God does not like people who ridicule others, and so on. There are many attributes. So I studied that philosophy, and that strengthened me greatly in my resolve to work and retain my independence as a person, which was a very difficult thing to do in the culture in which I was born. I want to say a little bit about that culture. The culture was very heavily patriarchal. Now, what is patriarchy? Patriarchy is a system which is male-centered, male-oriented, and male-controlled. Okay? And in addition to being patriarchal, patriarchy is everywhere in the country, and actually it's a dominant culture of the world as a whole. I see it like that. But in addition to that, Pakistan also had a very significant component of what we call tribalism, the tribal area, and feudalism. And feudalism is, when you have people who having large holdings of land, and people who live on that land are virtually slaves and serfs. So it was that kind of a culture. Anyway, I finished my studies, and then I was 24. I got my PhD, and there was nothing more to study for, so I had to go home. So basically, I had run away from home at 17 to study, and then I had to go back. But anyway, when I was 24 or 25 years old, I was not as vulnerable as I had been when I had been 12. So now the nature of my struggle changed. I was able to fend for myself. I wanted very much to teach at the university. That was my ideal. But I couldn't get a job at the university. I wanted to teach in the Department of Philosophy. I couldn't get a job because I was told that I was too qualified. All the men in the department all the professors in the department were men, and none of them had a PhD. So they were not going to let me be a part of that department. So if I'm one excuse or the other, they kept me hanging for a long time, and then I realized they were never going to hire me. So anyhow, I got a government job, and I went to live in Rawalpindi, which is another city next to the capital city of Pakistan. Now it's like the year is like 69, 70, and Pakistan has had a very troubled history. For most of its life, it's been ruled by military rulers, and then, but at that time, the great struggle was going on between the two wings of the country, West and East Pakistan, and East Pakistan eventually became Bangladesh in 1971. I was working at that time for the Pakistan Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, And I saw this whole matter from very close quarters. I was in that institution where policies were being made and broadcast. And that was a very, very heartbreaking experience for me. You know, I come from the first generation of Pakistanis, and I love my country very deeply. And it broke my heart that the country was being split into, mainly because the way the politicians had worked with the army to create a lot of tension between these two parts, which was separated by 1,000 miles of Indian territory. India was a hostile country. When this happened, when Bangladesh became a separate country, you know, people of Pakistan were very, very distressed. But the people in the offices were very delighted because now they were going to have more money, more bigger share of the pie, and so on. So that experience was very heartbreaking for me, and I thought that I need to go somewhere else. And the other thing that was an incentive for me to leave the country was that there was no respect for women working. You know, and as I said, I couldn't get a job as a teacher, and then I got a job, but the attitude was, you know, if you are a woman from a good family, you should not be working. Somebody, your father or your husband should take care of you. So there wasn't any respect given to, or encouragement given to women to work. So I decided I was going to look somewhere. And so in 1972, I came to America. I'd never been to America before. My elder sister had by that time moved into America, and so I came as a visitor. But you know, like so many people who come to this country, they come and they don't leave. So the first couple of years I was living in the area of Philadelphia, and I taught on a temporary basis at Villanova University and the University of Pennsylvania, where I first started teaching Islam. Anyway, I was going back and forth to Pakistan, and when I was 25, I got married. And you know, I had resisted my father's effort to marry me, but I was very independent. I wanted to make my own mistake. So I got married, and that marriage didn't work out. But anyhow, I came to America, and then in 1974, I came in 72, and in 74, I got a job in a place called Stillwater, Oklahoma. It's a tiny place, really sort of lives up to its name. And you know, you've heard the saying, still waters run deep. So really what happened, the incident that took place in Stillwater had a deep impact on the rest of my life. It actually changed my life. And Dr. Cohen has already given you a quotation from that time. When I came to this university, at that time I was there, and I had an infant child with me. She was 3 months old when I went to Oklahoma, and it was a pretty tough life. I mean, I was educated, but I had very few survival skills. I didn't know how to drive and so on. But anyway, at that university, there was a chapter of a student organization called MSA, Muslim Students Association. I don't know if you all have one, but it exists on many, many campuses in North America, US and Canada. And that university had a rule that every student campus needed to have a faculty advisor. And the only faculty advisor of that year who was a Muslim on campus was me. So I got appointed as their faculty advisor. This group of men in the MSA, they were all men, first of all, and they came from the Gulf area, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, which is probably the most conservative area in the Islamic world. And they were so patriarchal in their attitude that they did not allow women even to sit in the audience if they were having an event. Women were never seen at all. So you can imagine how thrilled they were to have me as their faculty advisor. But they couldn't do anything about it. Anyway, this group used to have an event in the fall of every year. This was their big event, seminar, and they invited people, speakers from outside, etc. But it was customary that the faculty advisor had to make some kind of a statement pertaining to the topic of the year, a few words. But in my case, they came to me, the students, and said, we want you to talk about the role of women in Islam. That was not the topic of the seminar. But they didn't think I was qualified to talk about anything else, even though I taught them Islamic studies, but no. I felt a little bit resentful because I understood what the invitation meant, but I decided to accept it, and I accepted it. My primary reason for accepting it was that I had come across so many writings, hundreds of writings, books, brochures, articles, on the role and status and position of men or women in Islam, virtually all of them written by men. And never the opposite. I mean, it seems that there was nothing written on men in Islam because perhaps they had no role or status or position. Nobody wrote about that. But anyway, I thought that maybe it's time that a woman's voice was heard in this arena. So I said, okay, I'll attempt to do that. Until that time, I had no conscious interest in this subject, despite all the ups and downs and vicissitudes of my own life and my own struggles, I wasn't thinking that way. So that was one reason I decided to do it. And the second was that I hated the patriarchalism of that group and their attitude towards women. And they believed, this group of men believed, and there are a lot of Muslims who still believe, that hearing the voice of a woman who is not related to them is haram, is mortal sin. So I said, well, at least they'll have to hear my voice. Let them at least be guilty of one mortal sin. So anyhow, for these kind of mixed motives, I accepted that invitation. I had about 3 months between that time and the actual time of the seminar, and I thought about it. What am I going to talk about? I'm certainly not going to talk about all the other things that articles are talking about, which is the responsibilities of a good Muslim wife and a good Muslim mother, and there's plenty written on it, so I don't need to talk about that. So what was I going to write on or speak on? And I decided that I was going to do a focused reading of the Quran. The Quran is the highest source of authority in Islam. Muslims believe it's the word of God, revealed through the agency of Angel Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad, who lived in the 7th century in an area called Hijaz in what is now Saudi Arabia. And I have always used the Quran as a textbook in the courses I teach on Islam. But I haven't done a focused study of the Quranic passages about women and women's issues. So I started to do that reading. And this is still in that summer, 74, very soon, I started to feel very, very angry and very upset because I saw for the first time in my life 2 things. One, that the teachings of the compassion towards women, the compassion towards downtrodden people in the Quran was so profound. And the difference between Quranic teachings about women and what was happening to women in Muslim cultures was so different. It was such a big gap. And I realized at the same time that so many things that happened to me, because I had been born female in the Muslim culture, the first time that I really made that connection. And there's no question about it, that time, that event in Stillwater changed the course of my life. Because I don't remember what happened at that seminar, but I know what happened when I went and started to study. And what I wanted to do then was I said that Muslim women don't know this. I had not known it until that time, and they need to know what the Quran says about women. So the first challenge that I encountered was, how was I going to read the Quran? Because there was no hermeneutics, there were no principles of exegesis or interpretation that I could use, because nobody had done this work before. So I had to develop my own set of criteria, my own hermeneutics. And I developed 3. And these hermeneutics were, the principles of interpretation were, first, linguistic accuracy. When you read a term, you read a concept, you have to know what that word meant at that time when the Quran was revealed, because words change their history. They don't mean the same thing through time. The second was philosophical consistency. For instance, if a word is used several times, like the word Adam is used 25 times in the Quran, you have to look at all the 25 instances and see how this word is used, what it means in different contexts. And the third criteria, which was to me the most important one, I call it the criterion of justice. And let me explain that to you. Muslims believe that the Quran is the word of God. Okay? So the Quran is the author of the book. But if the author is God, then the nature of God, how we conceive of God, must impact or must reveal itself in the interpretation. Let me put it this way. It's like, here is this book, we consider it authoritative, absolute authority is the word of God. But God is beyond and above the Quran, because the Quran came from God. So how the Quran is to be interpreted depends on how we understand God. And the Sufis say that God has 99 attributes. The two most important attributes of God in the Quran, repeated over and over and over again. The first two are part of every Muslim prayer. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. That's the prayer where the Muslims start every prayer in the name of God, the most merciful, the most gracious. So mercy and grace and compassion, that's the primary characteristic of God. And the second one is justice. And it says many times in the Quran that God will never do any injustice. Which means that when we are reading the Quran, when we come across a passage which seems to me, even at a human level, that this is not just, that would the Quran actually allow men to beat women or victimize them or discriminate against them, as very frequently people understand certain verses to mean? Would that be the intent of the author? Would that be the intent of a merciful, compassionate, and just God? And my answer was no, couldn't be. So then what do I do? Then I have to search deeper and further. Now, I want to say here a word about language. The language of the Quran is Arabic. Arabic is a Semitic language like Hebrew. Okay? And Semitic languages work differently from modern languages. If, for instance, you want to know what an English word means, you can look up, if you know how to spell it, you go to the dictionary and you look it up and it will tell you what it means. You can't do this with these two languages, Semitic languages. In order to know what a word means, you have to know the root of it. And the root is 2, 3 words or 4 words. It's like, look at it, think of a tree. A tree has roots and it's a trunk and it's branches and leaves and all that, but life comes from the roots, so you have to know the root. And it so happens, the way that Arabic works is that the root, every root has multiple meanings. There's not any Arabic word that has only one meaning. Which means that you actually cannot fix the meaning of any verse, of any place. And you've got to know the Quran means this and only this, and nothing but this. You cannot say that. That's not how the language works. Okay? So then, when I was interpreting something and I could not accept the popular understanding of it, then I would, I would do more research. I would look at the roots and I would study their history. And I would come up with another interpretation, which I felt was consistent with the idea of God's mercy and compassion. And, as a teacher, I've taught at the university for 33 years, but I've taught across the world. I've traveled in so many countries and talked to all sorts of people. And when I talk about this point of interpretation, I say to these young women, most of my audiences have been women, I say, okay, this is my interpretation of this verse, which has been very problematic, has been used against women for centuries. This is how I'm interpreting it. And I share with them the basis of my interpretation. And I said, now, I am not asking you to accept my interpretation. Okay? But I am asking you that if you don't like any interpretation in the traditional Islam, popular Islam, to think deeply about it. Because don't accept this idea or this proposition that this verse only means this. So you don't like my interpretation, go find your own, but don't accept the conventional understanding if it is contrary to justice and if it is contrary to mercy. So that was my purpose, was to show them that it was, given the nature of the language, it was possible to do that. If it had been a different language, maybe it would not have been possible. So language plays a very critical role in this whole study. Anyway, I used to go to Pakistan every year in the summer, as long as my mother was living, and things were happening. The most important historical event that took place was the Iranian Revolution of 1979. There have been two revolutions in the Muslim world in that century. The first one was the Turkish Revolution, 1924. And when that happened, Kemal Atatürk, who was the founder of that revolution, threw religion out of the window. He wanted to secularize Turkey. In the second one, Ayatollah Khomeini did the opposite. He wanted to Islamize the country. And after the revolution, a wave, which is called Islamization, spread to the Islamic world. Countries wanted to become more and more Islamic in that way. There were two superpowers at that time, the Soviet Union and the United States. The Soviet Union, half of the population of the Soviet Union were Muslim states. All the eastern states were Islamic. And the Soviet Union went into a huge panic because if this Islamic revolution of Iran was to spill over, it was going to be a great threat to them. So what the Soviets did is they decided to take control of Afghanistan. Afghanistan had been always a satellite state to the Russians since 1917. And they installed their own government. And the moment they did that, they installed a Russian-backed ruler of the country. A war began. This was the war of the Mujahideen, the Afghan people who said, we will not accept a godless rule. The Afghan people have never been conquered in history, and they are what they are, mountain people, very independent, very jealous of their autonomy. Anyhow, that war started for 10 years. That was going on. And one of the Mujahideen was Osama bin Laden. He fought against the Soviets for 10 years and was at that point the blue-eyed boy of the CIA, flying him around. And then the Western countries did other things. They established bases all around Iran and so on. I mean, I wish I had a lot of time to talk about it. It's a very, very important phase of history. But anyhow, so in 1983 or 84, I happened to spend 2 years in Pakistan. Normally I used to go for a few weeks or months in the summer, but that time I went for 2 years. One year I had a sabbatical, and the other year I had a fellowship from the National Endowment of Humanities. And I was actually working on the Quranic text relating to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. It was I wasn't working on women, but anyway, I was working on the Quranic text. And in the summer of 1984, this is exactly 10 years after I had started my first study, that a group of young Muslim women activists came to me. This whole movement was in Lahore, which was my city. And they came because what was happening was that the military ruler of Pakistan, General Ziaul, was promulgating a lot of laws which were very evidently aiming at women. I mean, all the laws, in fact, that were brought about as a result of Islamization were targeting women. Nothing else, not political corruption, economic mismanagement, nothing. Women. It's kind of ridiculous to have Islamization in an Islamic country. They're already Muslim, but the idea was they're not Muslim enough, so they have to need more laws. So they started promulgating these laws. The first group of laws that came about, it's called the Hudud Ordinance. It's very complex it's many, many laws actually combining, but they're all basically aiming at demoting the status of women. And one of them was called the Zina Ordinance. Zina in Arabic means sex outside of marriage, that is adultery or fornication. And the Hudud Ordinance, the Zina Ordinance said that if a woman said, for example, that she had been raped, her evidence was not admissible. Because she was a woman, and evidence was not admissible. Now it so happened shortly after this law came about that there was a case of a young girl who was a household servant. She was about 15 years old and she was near blind. And she was raped by the master of her house and by his son, and she became pregnant. And as a result of that, her father brought a case on her behalf in the federal Sharia court, which was the religious court. And the court ruled as follows. The court said her evidence was not admissible because she was female and she was blind. So her assailants could not be indicted, but because she was not married and she was going to have a child, so she was guilty of her crime. So her crime, and what they brought in as punishment was stoning. Stoning was never it's not mentioned in the law. You know, stoning had been in Jewish law and it had been abolished by Christianity. But it was brought back by these people who were framing these laws. Anyway, in this case, the judge said, well, because of extenuating circumstances, you know, she's poor and young and all that, they weren't going to do that. They weren't going to stone her to death, but she was ordered, you know, public lashing and rigorous imprisonment for some years. Now, this caused a tremendous amount of anxiety to the women in Pakistan because they began to see that these laws were going to target all women. It didn't matter if they were rich or poor or educated or uneducated. So they tried to do something, but there was very limited, they had very limited options because the country was under martial law. They couldn't have any political activity. So what they did is they started having small gatherings and rallies and press conferences, and they were persecuted. You know, some of them were put in jail, some of them lost their jobs. Anyway, that was the time when this group of women came to me in the summer of 1984. And they said, well, you know, these laws, and after that law, there were other laws that had come into existence. They said these laws are targeting women and in the name of Islam. And we don't know anything about Islam because the elite of Pakistan at that point were very westernized and very secularized and had very little knowledge about Islam. So they said, we don't know how to fight them, or we don't know how to counter them. And they said, well, you know, you've been studying this subject for years. Can you help us? Can you develop a theology of liberation for us that we can use against this onslaught of these inhuman laws? I was very, very touched. You know, the first defining moment of my life had been in Stillwater. I started my study. This was the second moment. Because at that point, I was asked to become a theoretician for a movement. It was not just for myself. So I said I would help them, but I needed some time. So that summer, I did a lot of studying. I studied the Hadith literature, these are the traditions of the Prophet. And I wish I had more time to talk to you about that, but they are very problematic. And there's a lot of, some of the Hadiths are very, very much against women. I studied them, and I had already studied Western, you know, American feminist writers. And so anyway, the question that I was debating in my mind at that point was, how is it possible in 1984, in a country like Pakistan, which was one of the most progressive Muslim countries, that you could have these laws that were so un-Islamic, so unjust, so archaic? How could you have them? That was the first question. The answer to that question was that you can have these laws because the men and the women believe that men are superior to women and women are inferior to men. Not just the men, everybody believes that. So if you believe that, then there's no difficulty about having these laws. The next question, why do they believe this? Because, you know, ideas also have a history. They come from somewhere. And at that, you know, I was deliberating on these matters, and then at the end of the summer, I formulated what I call the 3 fundamental theological assumptions. And these 3 assumptions are: God's primary creation was Adam. Adam was a male person. And from the rib of this male person, God created a female person called Eve. And therefore, she is secondary in creation and she is subordinate to Adam. This story comes from the book of Genesis, chapter 2. The 2 creation stories in Genesis. This is the second of the 2 stories. And the second assumption was that though she's secondary in creation, she's primary in guilt because she got where Adam thrown out of paradise. You heard that story? It's called the fall of man, and you know it's been traditionally interpreted in a certain way. The whole baggage of feminine ego, the woman is temptress, seductress, not to be trusted, etc., is attached to the story. And the third assumption was that, you know, so Genesis, the creation story comes from Genesis 2, and then the story of the fall is Genesis chapter 3, and then there is this sentence that also coming from Genesis, that not only was Eve created from man, but she was created for man. So he is fundamental and she's instrumental. So these are three fundamental myths, assumptions on which the superstructure of men's superiority to women rests in all these three traditions. Not only Islam, but all the three traditions. It developed actually, this theology developed within the Christian tradition. And then it had impacted both the Jewish tradition that came before it and the Islamic tradition. And to just give you a very small example of this, of the impact, you know, the Quran is not a chronological book, it's not a historical book, it's more like wisdom literature. It has a bit of everything in it, it's mixed together. And in order to understand what the Quran says, you have to read all of it, because it's not a chronological book. And so, you know, if you want to know what creation is in the Hebrew Bible, you go to Genesis, first book of the Bible, and you look at creation. But if you want to know what the Quran says about creation, you have to look throughout the Quran. And there are like 110 passages in the Quran related to creation. So many of them. But all three of them, all these 100 plus passages, talk about the creation of humanity from one single entity. And it uses generic terms for humanity like An-Nas, Al-Insan, and Bashar. Now, I want to say a word about the word Adam. The word Adam, is actually a Hebrew word, it's not an Arabic word. It comes from the root word Adam, which means earth. So the word Adam means an earth creature. Okay? It was borrowed by the Arabic language. So it means actually in the Arabic exactly what it means in the Hebrew. It means an earth creature. It doesn't mean a male person. And so just to see how these words function. So I formulated these assumptions, and you know these. So what I was saying was, I was going to tell you this little story. I've done a pop quiz all through the Islamic world in front of all sorts of audiences, students and lawyers and media people and so on, Muslims, and asked them one question: how was woman created? And the answer comes back without the blinking of an eye from the rib of Adam. I said, have you been reading Genesis? No. They don't read Genesis. I would have read Genesis if I had gone to an Anglican missionary school. So where did they get it from? Where did this idea come from? Well, it came from the Hadith literature. And if I had a lot of time, I would love to tell you those stories. Yes? Okay. All right. Anyway, so that made me lose my train of thought. Anyway. I told you the story to illustrate the impact of this idea. I mean, these traditions that are extra Quranic, have nothing to do with the Quran, have become central to how Muslims think. And even educated Muslims, even in educated Muslim society, we are living through an age where in cities, for instance, in the Muslim world, you see a lot of women driving, women doctors, women lawyers, women teachers. So how can we say that religion is having a negative impact on that? Well, I differentiate between two kinds of empowerment. There's external and there's internal. External empowerment has to do with tangibles, like standard of education, economic status, can you earn money, and so on. And if you look at these statistics, certainly women have learned a lot, they are going up in the scale, and so on. But the other aspect of empowerment is the internal aspect. which has to do with your inner state, feelings of shame, guilt, and fear, and so on. And Muslim women are still, I would say, more than 95 or 97% internally shackled. So that they may be educated, they may be able to earn the money, but they are still shackled. They are still under living under the shadow of the conventional understanding of Islam. In this country, you know, I hear this from all my friends, interreligious dialogue with Muslims is near impossible because they will not talk about real issues. They will come and tell you what the 5 pillars of faith are and so on. But to ask them one problematic issue, just ask them one question about the status of women, and it's very interesting. You know, I had the opportunity to be a plenary speaker at the 4th World Conference in Beijing in 1995, and the largest contingent over there were black women dressed in black from head to foot, with a lot of Muslim men traditionally dressed, and they were representing conservative Islam, very, very strong in number. And what they were saying was, but they were doing many things, but one of the things that they were saying was, women and Muslim women have no problems. You know, they live like a princess, they are taken care of, they work, and all of that. And it might be true in some ways, but that's not the whole picture. And I want to say that, you know, patriarchy, we associate patriarchy with men, but I want to make the statement that women are as strong supporter of patriarchy as men are. I've had that experience. It's not only men who support patriarchy, it's women also. And I've heard this argument between 2 groups of women, one conservative and one, what should I say, liberated, autonomous. And the women who are traditional say to these women, this is an allegory, this is symbolism, don't take it literally, but, you know, they say to these women, you know, we are in a gilded cage, it's made of gold, we're very comfortable, we get fed, we have no dangers, not affected by the weather, we are very happy. And here are you stupid birds flying around, you know, no security, danger. Why do you want to be like that? You see the point here? They are in a gilded cage, and they think that's preferable to being out there facing the hazards of nature. That is the sort of thing that's happening within the discourse of women. You know, it's a complicated situation. Anyhow, because Peter gave me 5 minutes ago, I have maybe another couple of minutes left, or my math is defective. That is that, you know, after that, since that time, that continues to be my quest, that I have to educate more and more and more people, more and more women. And I'm happy to say that in 1974, when I started my work, there was not one single person, male or female, who was doing this. And now today there are many, many, many. That I consider, you know, a very salutary development. But I want to also say that the majority of Muslim women, there are 1.8 billion Muslims, half of them at least are women, but the majority of them have 3 characteristics. They are poor, they are illiterate, and they live in a village. And they live in inexpressible oppression and injustice. And so a lot of work has to be done. And so I just hope and pray that the work that I have been doing all my life, that I can pass on my legacy to some people who can carry it on, because there is a lot of work that needs to be done.
Standing over here, you need to understand that Dr. Hassan has had many fatwas issued against her. Those are statements about she should be killed because of her ideas. So it's kind of like lightning. I'm over here. Also remiss if I don't mention that the Capital Honors College helped support her coming. Please, we have time for a few questions. Go ahead.
Oh,
Stand up and nice smile.
So, my question to you is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I've noticed that Islam worldwide seems to be modernizing and even moderating itself at just at the precise moment when virulent Islamophobic movements, whether it be Hinduism in India or the Chinese government's propaganda against the Uyghurs, or of course mentality, among the patriarchy, perceiving it needs to double down harder on the patriarchy to defend itself from enemies.
In 1 minute.
Okay, you have them ask me a one semester question and give me 1 minute to answer it, but the thing is this, that, let me answer your question this way, that Muslim society, by and large, remain traditional insofar as their attitude towards women's autonomy is concerned. As I said, women are getting educated, they're working, etc., but that attitude is not changing. Now, about the siege mentality, this is very interesting because this is applying not to Muslim women living in Muslim societies so much as it applies to Muslim women living here or living in other countries where there is rampant Islamophobia. Because, when statements are made against Islam, Islam is barbaric, etc., it impacts the whole society. So, say take the case of a person like me. I'm a woman, I've fought so hard all my life to become autonomous and so on. But when I'm sitting here in this country and I hear this constant criticism and the stereotyping of Islam, how am I supposed to react? And can I forget that the Western countries colonized almost the entire Muslim world, and what they did during the policy of colonization? So, and then, what my attitude is also affected by the attitude of Western people, say the Western feminists, because, and I've seen this happen, especially in the context of Iran, after the Iranian Revolution, that Western feminists, they are sympathetic to me, but they define autonomy as becoming like them. They say, this hijab, this is a great symbol of oppression. To the majority of women who are wearing it, it's not. It's their dress. And if you think that the fewer clothes you have on, the more emancipated you are, it doesn't make sense, So they are misidentifying what the real reason is. So basically the Western feminists were saying to these Iranian women, if you become like us, you will be emancipated. They don't want to become like us. They want to be Muslims, but they want to be independent. They feel they have an independent relationship with God. They are equal to the men. This is what, this right they don't get in Muslim countries, this right they don't get anywhere. Because here, if you start claiming autonomy, then, they're pushed in another direction. So the real quandary is of educated Muslim women, especially living in the West. They hurt more than anybody else.
Question from a woman, please. Yes.
If the account of Eve being created from the rib of Adam isn't found in the Quran, how do you think it made its way into the Hadith?
Peter, can you repeat that? I didn't hear it.
If the account of Eve being created from the rib of Adam isn't actually found in the Quran, how do you think it made its way into the Hadith?
How did the creation of Eve make it into the Hadith?
Well, this is it got, I don't know, I can't give you a date and say, on this date it entered Hadith. But if you look at Hadith literature, it's there. So, and why it's there is because, okay, sometimes when I'm explaining Islam to my students, I use this metaphor or this image. Think of a basket down here and say this is Islam. Into it have fallen the religious background, the religious ideas from Judaism and Christianity and other religions also, like Manichaeism, like Zoroastrianism, all of them, because Islam is the last of these religions. So all these prejudices against women in these religions have fallen into this basket. Then the cultural ones, Arab attitudes. They used to bury their daughters alive at the time when Islam was born. And then, so there's the stream of religious ideas, there's a stream of the cultural ideas, and then there's the philosophical stream, dualism coming out from Greek thought and also Persian thought, which means that all reality consists of two principles, one higher, one lower. The higher principle is logos, reason, is equated with men. The lower principle is female, is carnality associated with women. So men and women have always been unequal, and men, the real struggle that's been going on, for instance, in the Islamic world, in the Catholic world, the opposition to to family planning and all that is because the assumption is that men own the bodies of women. You know, and so they can control them and they can control their sexuality. So that's what is happening. So they have these ideas have gone into these traditions. And you know, you call me here for a semester, I'll show you how. But it's very difficult to say that in a few minutes. But they have infiltrated these ideas. So these ideas that you find are not coming from the Quran. And I say that on the basis of having read this book over and over and over again since 1974.
Someone else? You could ask the same question about the Hebrew Bible. How did it get in there? How two stories get in there about creation? They are there.
Well, let me tell you something that might be of interest to you. I'm assuming that the majority of people in this room have coming from a Christian background. That say take the story of you know the two creation stories. The first story, Genesis chapter 1 verses 26 and 27. And God created Adam, male and female. He created that and gave them. It's egalitarian concept. The second is the rib story. Okay, so one story has kind of disappeared, that egalitarian story, and the rib story has gone forward and it was interpreted in a certain way. Look at the fall story. Okay? Now, Genesis chapter 3 starts like this, and the serpent was the most wily of creatures, said to the woman, did God really tell you not to eat the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden? Now, it doesn't tell us who the serpent is, why the serpent is talking to the woman. But the assumption is that the serpent is talking to the woman, he tempts her, and she eats the fruit, and she gave it to her husband. And the assumption is that their husband, Adam, is somewhere else, sleeping under a tree, and she takes this apple and says, oh, come on, eat it, you know. She's very seductive. Well, you know what it says in the text? That he gave the apple to the woman, who gave it to her husband, who was with her. There is a preposition imam in Hebrew, which means with her. That has been omitted from all the translations until recent times. So he was there all the time. She is not the one communicating with him. So, you know, if you read feminist theology, they have turned these stories on their head. These stories don't mean what they have been interpreted in the centuries. You know, so I have learned a lot from studying people like Rosemary Luther and Phyllis Fravel and so on, who have been doing research on the biblical text. Because they, again, like in Islam, the interpreters were all men. I mean, first, for hundreds of years, it was starting from St. Paul, you know, his famous statement, you know, in the letter to the Corinthians, I do not allow any woman to prophesy with her head uncovered. If she will not cover her head, she has to have her hair cut off, which means she was making a statement that you're a harlot. Woman is made in the image of God. Man is made in the image of God. Woman is made in the image of man. If a man must not cover his head, and women must cover their heads. I mean, you think the hijab is coming from the Islamic tradition? This is St. Paul, who was an Orthodox Jew before he became a Christian. And then he says, you know, for woman came from man, not man from woman, and woman was responsible for the death of, for sin coming into the world, for which Jesus, the Son of God, had to die. So linking up with the sin of Adam, with the sin of Eve, and saying Jesus had to die because of the sin of Adam. So, I mean, you read, that's St. Paul, that's the Catholic tradition. And, you know, until the 20th century, went on along the same line. But the Protestant tradition, reformers, Martin Luther, very liberal in some ways. But what about the attitude towards women? He permitted marriage, but in the marriage contract, in the marriage situation, she was to call her husband her Lord. This doesn't exist in the Catholic tradition. The word Lord was only used for God. But now it comes to be used for man. You know, first Lord, the God, the Lord of the manor, and then the husband has the same authority as that of God. And you know this in the marriage contracts when it says a wife has to be subordinate, has to obey the husband. This is coming from the Protestant tradition. So I mean, I think we really need to look at a lot of things and see where they came from and where there was any liberation. I really think that until this feminist theological movement, which started in this country in the 19th century, with people like Candy Stanton Stanton, who wrote the Women's Bible, and then following, I mean, it developed, it was always written in wrong way. Now, there's a whole lot of research, and we are all moving toward liberation, but it's still, how many people accept that? How many people know that?
Most people don't realize also that there's no concept of original sin in the Hebrew Bible or in the Quran.
Yeah, no. There is.
And the question that Dr. Hassan was asked one time that she related is, what is the Muslim concept of salvation?
Yeah.
To which you answered that
There is no salvation. In the text, in the text, for instance, the story of the fall, it says, and when they ate the apple, they disobeyed God, and they realized that they were naked. They had been naked before, but they didn't realize it. And what's the first thing they do? They start gathering the leaves and covering themselves, okay? And then God is going to talk to them. Now, St. Augustine says that the first thing they did when they became naked was they had sex. Okay? And because then there was children are born as a result of that, every child that's born bears the burden of original sin. But where is there any mention of sin in that story? There's no mention of sin or sexuality. The first thing that they did was an eminently decent thing. They covered themselves. So that original sin concept came out of St. Augustine's life and his beliefs. But that doctrine of original sin has done more damage to women, and I think to the tradition as a whole than perhaps any other. So I think we really need to have a better look. I taught, I was teaching a course of women religion in Louisville, and it's a part of the Bible Belt. And some of my students used to get very angry. One time, an African American student stood up and said, I don't agree with you. I don't like your approach. You're not taking our scripture seriously. She was saying me as a non-Christian, as a non-white person, and how dare I'm speaking about the Bible, and I'm not taking it seriously. And I looked at her and I said, as a matter of fact, I'm taking it very seriously. I'm studying the Bible with as much care as I'm studying the Quran. I'm looking at it word by word. So you read it now. Don't assume things that this is what it means. So we have to get past these assumptions. And you are in an ideal place, you're in a university, you have the opportunity to do that, you have teachers here who can help you do that. So because whatever we say, however we define ourselves, religion affects the vast majority of people. In this country, it affects more than 60% people. Muslims and Christians, these two religions together comprise 55% of humanity. So this is a serious matter. It's not a peripheral thing. I would suggest that if you think that these, especially for Muslims, if they think this is the highest authority and we have to live according to it, for God's sake, try to understand what it's saying, because they don't understand what it's saying. They think they understand, and they're using this book to oppress people. Not only women, but disadvantaged people in all categories. So the problem with Islam is today, they are focused, especially here in this country, focusing mainly on two things: rituals. They're very, very particular with that. Praying 5 times a day and fasting and all that. And then the other is social life. A lot of emphasis on social interaction, and they are having open houses and they're hospitable to other people, but they don't want to raise any questions about tradition or about conventional culture at all. In no mosque in this country have I seen that they are willing to raise these questions. And I think it's some of them, they are just either very afraid, out of fear they don't want to ask any questions, or they think that tradition is tradition. The Quran says that the Arabs at the time of the Prophet, when they were rejecting what he was saying about life and about accountability and justice and life after death, they would say, no, we will not accept what you are saying because our tradition says otherwise. So it's a deification of tradition. Our tradition says otherwise. And the Quran says, following tradition blindly is a form of kufr, is a form of disbelief. Total disbelief. You have to question. The Quran says in every chapter, many, many times, reason. Think about it, think about it, think about it, think about it. The two gifts that God gave to human beings that lifted them over the angels was the gift of reason and the gift of free will. But how many Muslims there are who won't exercise either in these kinds of matters? They exercise them in other, the brilliant doctors and surgeons and engineers and all that, but how many of them are applying it to real life and to this gross inequality between men and women? I mean, even to this day, we go to the mosque, women are here, men are there, women can't sit in the front, women can't speak, women have to be covered, all of these things. I mean, these are just symbols, they're symptomatic of the deeper problem, and the deeper problem is that women must always be supported. Women, they cannot leave the house without the permission of the father or the husband, and so on and so forth. So the only way to end this era, this long era of oppression and disparity and injustice is through knowledge. There is no other way.
According to the Jewish tradition, can anyone tell me what the first commandment is in the Bible?
Thou shalt have no graven images before you. What is it?
Go forth and multiply and
Yeah.
replenish the earth.
Oh,
So
yeah.
how can that be a sin?
Some
One more
people,
question if we have it.
some people take that very literally, right?
I mean, there's Kevin Ira. Please join me in thanking Dr. Hassan.